وعلى بشير ونذير أما بعد اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. First of all, I'd like to thank Maulana Imad and all the rest of the team here for inviting me to talk on some really sensitive and important topics. And it's something that we sometimes seem to overlook, but a lot of thought actually goes into behind the processes of Islamic bioethics. And it's something that I've been involved in recently. I had an interest in it since my madrasa days. So after I started university, I've taken part in the bioethical sort of programs that they've had, and I've presented on several bioethical cases. Also, I've recently started working with the CIM, the Center of Islamic Medicine, and will co-host something next year, a program. And it's actually to raise awareness of certain issues that take place within the Muslim community and sensitive issues that take place around death. And I'm sure after this presentation, I've been given a short time frame to cover a lot. But after this presentation, if you do have any questions, we'll have the Q&A session. Also, I've left my email address here, and the presentation will be available. I'll leave it with Maulana here, and people can actually look at that afterwards. So to get started, during this presentation, I'll be talking about the issues surrounding stillborn infants, switching off the ventilator, and organ donation. So, first of all, stillborn babies, we'll start at the beginning. A baby is considered stillborn after 24 completed weeks of pregnancy. So before that, the baby, if the baby passes away, it will be deemed as a miscarriage or a late fetal loss. So in Islam, the general understanding is the baby should be given a name and given a ritual washing. And there is a slight difference of opinion between the Islamic schools of thought in whether or not this ritual washing should conform to the sunnah washing that takes place of a dead person or not. But generally, the dispensation is given for giving the baby a ritual washing, and the funeral prayer is not to be performed on this stillborn baby, and this is the opinion of the Hanafi and Maliki schools of thought. So before I start with the other issues, I'd just like to mention the methodology that an Islamic scholar uses to arrive at conclusions regarding novel issues. And obviously it's very complex, but I'd like to simplify as much as I can. So in Islam, we have a standard Islamic legal framework to arrive at conclusions and rulings regarding novel issues. So issues that didn't take place before and have no precedent in the classical fiqh literature. So first we look at the Quran. If this issue anything has been mentioned through the different forms of extraction from the Quran itself, and then we look at the prophetic traditions, the Sunnah, and then we resort to see if there was any consensus by the previous scholars, and then the scholar would look at analogical reasoning or qiyas. And scholars independently do this, and they publish specific answers to specific queries, which are then peer-reviewed, and these are known as fatawa, which are non-binding. But more recently, from the 1970s, and especially when it comes to Islamic biomedical and bioethical issues, institutions have been set up which have actually a multidisciplinary effort, and something takes place which is called Jamiah, which is a collective reasoning. And one of the first institutions for this was set up in the late 1970s. So the reasons for this, it was because either religious scholars were unacquainted with the scientific discourse, so what was the scientific advancements at the time. So a multidisciplinary effort had to be made, so gatherings had to take place which involved Muslim medics and involved Muslim biomedical scientists. And this was really important to arrive at adequate Islamic legal conclusions. So Ijtihad Jama'i took place, and this took place in 4 main institutions. So the first, chronologically speaking, the first institution that actually took place was the Islamic Fiqh Academy, which was established in 1977, and that was associated with the Muslim World League in Mecca. And the second one was the International Islamic Fiqh Academy, similar name, but this was known as IIFA, and this was established in 1981, and this was based in Jeddah. And then the third was the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences in Kuwait, and the final one with the European Council for Fatwa and Research. And it's important to note that several scholars from all over the world were invited at these symposia, and several deliberations took place, and they've all been recorded in 100-page documents, and it's all widely available and been translated into English. And and another important thing to note is all of these weren't mutually exclusive bodies. I mean, members of one organization did actually go to the other organization and vice versa. So these were the four main institutions. So the reason I mentioned that is because all of these issues and everything which I'm going to talk about today has actually been discussed in those symposia. So it's not something new. So the first thing is switching off the ventilator. Now this is a question that Muslim medics struggle with, as well as Islamic scholars, people who have graduated from classical institutions. They are asked this question, and also Muslim medics, they are also asked this question. And if you ask anyone who's had to deal with this question, they feel that they are not equipped to deal with it because there are several sort of things that they need to take into consideration. So first of all, I'd like to say that there is no blanket ruling, and it shouldn't fall on a single scholar or a single person to make this decision. It would be a collective group or a council of different scholars who would come together and share and look at because you have to judge it on a case-by-case basis, so you look at the different considerations that you will have to make. But in the Islamic tradition, we sort of categorize death as when the soul leaves the body. And now this is a metaphysical and a spiritual issue, and it's very difficult to determine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, and they ask you, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about the ruh, the nature of the ruh. قُلْ هُوَ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, it is from the affairs of my Lord. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs him that the ruh is something that is ambiguous and is surrounded with mystery. So it's really difficult to determine when the soul actually leaves the body. But some considerations that took place during those symposia was cardiopulmonary death and brainstem death. So cardiopulmonary death, in layman's terms, is when the heart stops beating and the lungs stop functioning. So the oxygenated blood that the body needs for the organs to function is not being received by the organs. So this is one type of death. But after cardiopulmonary death, so after the heart and the lungs stop working, we can have the ventilator to carry on mechanically and artificially carry on the pumping of this blood around the body and maintain the functions of the organs. But a person can be deemed brainstem dead, and that can still happen. So simply, if we were to anatomically divide the brain into two sort of categories, you'd have the cortex of the brain and the brainstem. And the brainstem is sort of responsible for all the autonomic features that the body has. So for example, things that are beyond our conscious control. So our breathing and our consciousness as well, like the brainstem, they say is the place of consciousness. That's where consciousness lies. So when a person is brainstem dead, is that considered death, or is it when their heart and their lungs stop functioning? Is that considered death? Now, you might say, okay, a person is dead anyway, like Maulana mentioned, when a person is dead, they're gone anyway. So what is the point of knowing the point of their death? Is it cardiopulmonary death, or is it brainstem death? And this comes when we're looking at the implications. So in Islam, we have the iddah, or the waiting period for a widow before she can remarry, happens from the point of death. So you have to determine whether that is brainstem death or whether that is cardiopulmonary death. Because after a person's heart stops beating, we know that even though they're brainstem dead, the ventilator can carry on pumping the blood around. So is it that point when the ventilator is turned off, or is it when their brainstem is irreversibly dead and they can't come back to life? So the waiting period for the widow. The second implication that it has is the distribution of inheritance. So in Islam, this is something that is binding and is ordered by the Quran, the distribution of inheritance, and this can only take place when a person is considered dead. And the third implication is the funeral rites that take place, so the ghusl and the salatul janaza. So you have the ritual washing and the prayer that is to be performed on the body, and this can only take place when a person is so deemed dead. So does brainstem death equal cardiopulmonary death? So the OIC, one of the institutions I mentioned in the beginning, the Organization of Islamic Conferences and Islamic Fiqh Academy in 1988, they judged that the Islamic law permitted two standards for the declaration of death. So one was when all vital functions of brain cease irreversibly and the brain has started to degenerate as witnessed by two specialist physicians. And the second point was when the heart and respiration stopped completely and irreversibly as witnessed by physicians. Now this conclusion in 1988, we have a lot less time, but there were a few problems with it. One problem I'll just mention is when all the vital functions of the brain cease. So who determines what a vital function of the brain is? So the IOMS, which is the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences, in the 1985 session, they concluded that the diagnosis and the signs of death have always been a medical matter. So they completely relegated death to the medical professionals, and they said when a doctor decides that the patient is dead, then the patient is dead. So they sort of escaped all the metaphysical issues about the ruh leaving the body, etc., and all these implications by just leaving it to the medical professionals. And they all actually, in this symposium, they all agreed, and it was a unanimous conclusion that death isn't cardiopulmonary death, but it is brain stem death. And they used the brain stem criteria to determine death. And there were some, and this actually escaped deliberation of the vital functions of the brain, because when does that actually take place? So they would rely on expert testimony to determine death, right? But there was a slight problem that the medical professionals came up with afterwards, that when the medical professional actually determines this person dead, is it a dominant probability or certain? Is it ghalabatul dhann or is it yaqeen? So these were two terms used. And the whole point of these sessions were to inform clinical practice. So it was actually to inform the Muslim medics of when the person is actually dead, so things can actually go forward with that. So this is actually a summary, and I've left the source here, the brain death in Islamic ethical legal deliberation. So this was basically a summary of all the different institutions that determine when death actually takes place, and for different reasons. So WLS is withdrawal of life support. So the first actually fatwa that was issued was by the Iranian government, so it was from the Shia school, and the Sunnis followed shortly afterwards. So in Kuwait, actually in 1981 in Kuwait, they said that brain death is not legal death. So they said brain death isn't legal death. So if a person is on the ventilator and the heart keeps on pumping mechanically and artificially, they are still deemed somewhat alive. They say manzil, they are in a state bain al-manzilatain, between life and death. And next door in Saudi Arabia, but they said that brain death is sort of legal death, and they use this as a criterion for withdrawal of life support. And at this point, you could, if you wanted to donate the organs, you could do it. You can procure the organs at this point. And there were a few more institutions. I mentioned their conclusion on this slide. So, okay. So organ donation. So this was some of the thought processes that go on when determining when to take the life support machine off. And it is a complex process, but all of these points that I've mentioned in the previous slides have to be taken into consideration when determining when to withdraw the life support. So now we're going to talk about organ donation. Now this is actually a topic on its own. A few months ago there was a conference that we had for the public. Dr. Mansour Ali, who is a classical scholar, and mashallah, he's done a lot of research on organ donation in the recent past. And we actually had a group of scholars that came together afterwards, and they sort of highlighted points, and it was a very interesting discussion that I will go into some points that were mentioned in there. But briefly, organ donation in UK law. So as we know, the last Act of Parliament was the Human Transplantation Act in Wales in 2013, and this was actually a consultation for the opt-out, opt-in system, and that will soon be coming into the UK. So there was a big scare in the recent past that, okay, opt-in, opt-out, what does this actually mean? Do I have to give my organs, or what is this whole business about? But it's really important to note that 29% of the BAME community, who are the black and Asian minority ethnic community, are on the organ transplantation register, that they need organs, they need organs to receive, and only 3% are on the register to give. So there's a huge disparity between supply and demand. And we're going to look at the reasons for that. Why is that? Why people choose not to give, and why people choose to give. So just to quickly summarize what organ transplantation actually is. So there's two types. You have reception of the organs, and that's either done out of necessity, of darura, or you have it for cosmetic purposes of beautification, etc. And in terms of donation, you have the xenotransplant, which is transplanting of organs between species. So you have things like, you'd have the people who are in medical practice will know that in cardiac surgery they use bovine and porcine heart valve transplants. So they take the valve of the heart from a pig or a cow and they put it into human beings. So they have that, the xenotransplant. Then you have the autotransplant, which is transplanting your own organ to your own organ. For example, you have a skin graft. So taking a portion of your skin from a part of your body and putting it in another part of your body. And then you have the allotransplant, which is obviously the most common. So you transfer an organ from one individual of the same species to another individual. And in this we have two subcategories. We have a live donor and we have a cadaveric donor. A live donor is when it's split into two, again, vital organs, double-digit organs. So for example, we have a kidney transplant that can be done from a live donor. So a live person can actually donate their kidney. Or you have bone marrow transplants, which you can do once when a person is alive. And the second type is a cadaveric donor. So a person who is dead and post-mortem, they actually can donate their organs. And then we discuss cardiac death and brainstem death and the implications regarding that. And the last type is artificial. So you have prosthetic and cloning. So you have things that can be manufactured in the lab and grown in the lab. Also, as obviously it's not an issue at the moment, but cloning is something that's discussed in the bioethical papers. So preliminary remarks regarding the organ donation is that there is no mention of organ donation in the Quran, there is no mention of organ donation in the Sunnah, and there is no mention of organ donation in the classical fiqh literature. And the first fatwa given on organ donation was in the 1950s. So these 6 points that you can see on the screen at the moment, these are the 6 fatwa, and this is actually taken from the research of Dr. Masood, who I mentioned is a classically trained scholar, as well as a bioethicist, Islamic bioethicist at the University of Cardiff. Now he has read hundreds of fatwa around the world on the subject of organ donation, and he has summarized those fatwa into 6 fatwa. So I'll go through them one by one. So the first fatwa is that it's haram to donate and it's haram to receive. Now this fatwa was given in the 1950s by Mufti Shafiq Uthmani, who is the father of the teacher of our teachers, Shaykh Islam Mufti Uthmani. Now at his time, he gave the fatwa that you cannot, when sort of the medical advances took place and they found out that you can transplant organs from one being to another being, he gave the fatwa, no, it won't be allowed. And when looking at the reasons, the ulama mentioned in that gathering that we had, that at that time in India, and still to this day, there is no government-endorsed organ donation program. So this would give, if Maulana gave jawaz and he gave permissibility for that, for organ donation, then it would mean that it would open the doors to the black market, or like people would sell their own organs, or people would sort of kidnap people and take their organs, etc. So we would be giving the green light to that at that time. So this was sort of mentioned at that time, and this is also the fatwa from one of the scholars of the Burnley school, the grandson of Maulana Ahmad Khan Burnley. He also gave a similar fatwa, but the way where they differ, Mufti Shafi and Maulana Raza Barelvi, is that Mufti Shafi didn't allow sort of blood donation also at that time, but the other scholar he did. So the second fatwa is halal to receive, haram to donate. And this is most South Asian scholars, and we're going to look at the reasons for it if we have time. The third fatwa is halal to receive, halal from a live donor, but haram from a dead donor. And this is most of the South Asian scholars. So halal from a live donor means a person can donate their bone marrow, right, and they can receive the bone marrow. A person can donate the kidney and they can receive the kidney. But it's haram to receive an organ and actually post-mortem donate that organ. So this is the view of the most of South Asian scholars. These are the fatwa that are circulated. The next opinion is it's halal to receive, halal from a live donor, halal from a cardiac dead donor, but haram from a brainstem dead donor. So what that means, the person on a ventilator who has now passed away. They're sort of brainstem dead, but the machine is still pumping the blood around the body and sort of giving them that ventilation that is needed. And all the organs still are oxygenated, so the organs are still alive. So for this person, is at this point, can you take their organs or not? So according to this fatwa, it's halal to take it from a cardiac dead donor, or haram from a brainstem dead donor. That means that if you are on the life support machine, you can't take the organs until you sort of withdraw that and they are deemed cardiopulmonary dead. The next fatwa is halal to receive, halal from a live donor, or halal from a dead donor. So you can receive, for example, a kidney transplant from a live donor or bone marrow transplant. You can actually give that. When I say receive, I also mean give also. So it's halal from a dead donor, and this is the halal from a dead donor and halal from a live donor, and halal to receive. So this is all permissible, and this is the opinion of most of the Arab scholars and some of the East Asian scholars. I don't mean that the whole sort of geographical location agree on this particular point, but the fatwa that were sort of issued in that area, generally this was the conclusions derived from those fatwa. And the last opinion was that it's halal to receive, haram from a live donor, and halal from a dead donor. And this was some of the Arab scholars, because they saw that if you were sort of taking an organ from a dead donor, it's unnecessary mutilation to someone who's alive. So this was the reason. So all of these 6 opinions, they are all an Islamic opinion, and this is a matter of ijtihad. One of our teachers, Maulana Yunus, actually wrote to Mufti Taqi Uthmani a while back, and we saw the letter also. And he mentioned regarding organ donation, he said, what is the ruling regarding it? And he mentioned that ye masala ijtihadiyya, which means that this masala is a matter of heuristic difference of opinion and is a matter of ijtihad. So it's a matter of legal reasoning. So every scholar would sort of give according to the considerations that would be taken in that particular locality. And when Mufti came recently to the UK, a group of scholars also asked him a similar question. He gave a similar response. So I'd like to mention the declaration of the Islamic Fiqh Academy, one of the institutions of the Ijtihad Jamiah. So they mentioned that live organ donation is permissible and a praiseworthy act, so it's mustahab, with the following conditions. So they gave a few conditions. One of the conditions is that the donor must not be harmed critically. Right? So the person who is donating, they must not be harmed critically. So this was in regards to live organ donation. So for example, the kidney or the bone marrow. Secondly, the donation must be taken with consent. So in Islam, we have a big notion of consent, that you can't use, everyone has the right, has the autonomy to do as they please. So it wouldn't be taken, the donor wouldn't be coerced into giving their organs. So the third point is that if this is the only treatment available. So if you could have any other treatment that would give the same standard, then you would resort to the other treatment. So if this is the only treatment available, this Islamic Fiqh Academy, the IFA, they concluded that you would sort of have the organ transplant. And the fourth point is, if there's a high probability of success, for harvesting and transplanting. So you wouldn't give it to a person who they wouldn't survive the surgery, or a very elderly patient who didn't have that long anyway. So you'd actually weigh the pros and cons together before making the decision. So they still left it onto the individual scholars and the Muslim biomedical scientists. And the next point they mentioned was the dead donation is a fortiori permissible, so it's the strongest argument that it is permissible. The deceased was legal, and this is providing that the deceased was legally competent when alive. So a person has to be legally competent when alive. They have to be an adult, they have to be aqil, etc. And proper consent was sought from that person. And this was the declaration in 2003 from the 8th session of the Majma' al-Fiqh-al-Islami, the IFA. So what are the issues surrounding organ donation? So what are the issues first against organ donation? Why do people choose not to give their organs? Muslim people, why do they choose not to give their organs? So the first argument is our bodies belong to Allah. So we don't have the right to govern what happens with our own body. So the issue of autonomy comes there. And it's Allah's right, and Allah owns the body, and our body has just been given to us as a trust and as an amana. And another issue that comes to light is the dignity of a human being. So in Islam, life is sacred and the human body is also sacred. So we have a concept and an issue of hurma. So when someone mutilates or does mufla, which is mutilation, this is sort of against the Islamic principle. And when looking for a definition for mutilation in the classical Islamic literature, there is no consensus actually. So this is quite a tricky one. The second one is prolonging the burial. So in Islam, as soon as a Muslim passes away, it's incumbent that they be buried as soon as possible. And the third point is the fear of black market organ trafficking. So we don't really have that fear here in the UK, but it can be an issue in other parts of the world. And theological issues that people might face, and I've heard this from people also, this is mentioned in the literature, that the body feels pain after death. So in the hadith, we have the issue of the qabr azab, etc. So does the body feel pain after death? So this is an issue which is a metaphysical issue also, it's a spiritual issue. If Allah wants, He can do anything He wants. He doesn't really need that physical body to afflict pain or give ease. Another issue is that a person who decides to give the organ, they might decide not to give the organ because they might think that they will be resurrected in front of Allah organless. So this is another theological issue that people face. But again, if Allah wishes, we have that belief in Allah. The howness of things like this we relegate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even if He wanted to, all those people who have given the organs in the Islamic position, we apply to the position that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to, He can sort of resurrect them, and He will resurrect them. So if the recipient commits a crime, now this is an interesting one. So for example, if you were to receive a transplant, for example, a hand transplant, so a person who died and they donated their hand, if the person went on to steal with that hand, who would be the sinner? Because that belonged to the person originally, or would the sin transfer to the other person? So this is an issue that people come up with, and people sort of think about, I don't want to give my organs for these theological reasons, and they are interesting. But as I've already mentioned, in the deliberation that we had with the scholars in Oldham 3 months ago, came to the conclusion that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to, He can do so anyway. And these are metaphysical matters. Metaphysical matters aren't really sort of, we don't apply these principles to them. So, issues for organ donation. Our body does not belong to us, so. Okay, so first of all, we have 3 types of right in Islam. So we have the rights of Allah, we have rights of the people, and we have rights shared between Allah and the people. So rights of Allah will include like our prayers, etc., things that are relegated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we have rights of the people, so things which our daily transactions, etc. Then we have rights shared between Allah and the people. And we have 2 juristic principles that govern this, is that whenever, I'll just summarize these now, because we're kind of running out of time. So anything which sort of is a shared right between Allah and the people have, so the person has autonomy and discretion to do what he wishes with that, and he has a right of altruism, which is selflessness, and helping other people with that right. Also, people who argue that organ donation is against dignity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, we have dignified the children of Adam. And in the hadith, there's a hadith which people bring when it comes to organ donation. A hadith is the saying of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is breaking the bones of the dead is like breaking the bones of the living. And people apply this to organ donation, saying that, okay, it's like you're mutilating the body after the person has died. But when looking at the context of this hadith, which is found in Ibn Majah, it was actually when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking about certain practices that used to happen at his time, which was grave robbing. What used to happen is a person used to have a burial shroud, and they would be buried with that particular burial shroud, and this used to be worth some money, and people would sort of dig up the grave and take the burial shroud off that corpse, and in the process they would break the bones, to which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kasr idham al-mayyit ka kasr al-hayya," which is the breaking the bones of the dead is like breaking the bones of the living. So there's a group of the scholars who find to the permissibility of organ donation. They say organ donation is dignity, Whoever saves a life has saved the whole of humanity. So by you saving a life, you have saved humanity. And we have dignified the children of Adam. They can actually interpret that in the way that it's dignity to actually donate. Okay, so this, last slide. So we have Qawa'id Fiqhiyya, which are sort of golden principles that we apply to novel situations as well. And these were sort of laid out by the scholars of the past. So in Islam, even the latest scholars still sort of trod the path of the previous scholars when it comes to sort of arriving at conclusions. So the argument is al-daruratu tubihul mahdhurat, which is necessity permits the forbidden. So even if it was by default forbidden, necessity would permit it. And things are determined by the intention, al-umur bi-maqasidiha. And another principle to take into consideration is choosing the lesser of the two evils. So akhaffu ad-dararain, what will be the lesser of the two evils? Would it be sort of mutilating your body, or would it be saving the life? So it's a weighing scale that you have to balance when sort of looking at the bioethical issues. So I've not really given you a conclusions, I've just given you what people say that are for organ donation and what some scholars say which are against organ donation. And it's important that we sort of make our minds up ourselves regarding this issue, because it's an issue of ijtihad, and you should consult the local scholars and they will sort of guide you appropriately. Okay, so I had a slide for questions at the end, but there will be a question and answer session. So jazakumullahu khairan.